we see a huge untapped potential in all those climate data that's out there. And there's so much climate data out there. And I see very few startups that actually use it.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to our second episode of Catalyzing Conversation in Climate, C-Cubed, the limited series podcast hosted by the Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs, ANDE, and WWF Impact, World Wildlife Fund's impact investing arm. I'm Isabelle.
And I'm Laura. And we are excited to build off our last episode with Felipe Gonzalez Rosas from Catalyst and Tech de Monterrey to talk about another important part of building the climate tech ecosystem in emerging markets.
Let's get started.
On today's episode, we are thrilled to be joined by Gideon Blaauw, based in Bogota, Colombia, who is the regional lead for CleantechHUB Latin America. We'll hear about the work that CleantechHUB and partners do, including supporting entrepreneurs in the responsible use of data and AI for climate innovation.
Welcome, Gideon. We're so excited to have you join us today. You've worn several different hats across the private sector and impact space. Could you please share with us a little bit about your journey to where you are today, leading CleantechHUB in Latin America?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for the invite. It's awesome to be here with you guys. Talk a little bit about our work, but okay, let's start with my personal journey. I used to work in the financial sector. Of course, I deal a lot with the financial sector. And that's about, 12, 13 years ago. It set me on a journey into impact investment. This was back in 2012. I was working as a tax lawyer, actually, in wealth structuring, wealth management. I came across a lot of clients, especially high net worth individuals, families that were very interested in working in the space of impact investment. Back then, there was nothing. There was no clear frameworks, no policies, no Paris Accord, nothing. And still, everybody wanted to jump into that new, let's say, niche in the investment space. And that set me on a journey, a personal journey first, and then later together with partners. And that was also, for me, the first time that I tried to understand what is impact investment, my role would be in that. And it all culminated, let's say, in what we started back in 2019, which is nowadays called the CleantechHUB.
That's incredible. 2019, how far we've come. I would love to hear a little bit more about where you are now and how you're starting to incorporate that data first mindset in your support for entrepreneurs. What does that mean? And how can entrepreneurs use that to scale their businesses?
This goes way back, I would say, to the beginnings of when we started with talking about impact investment. The investment part, everybody understood. Then, okay, what's the impact part? Social impact, environmental impact, and then everybody was trying to figure out what it was. And now we have a lot of, let's say, metrics and frameworks, and the IRIS and the GRI. There's ESG. Some things are very well, we can measure very well, others we cannot. And so I see the whole data first thing basically as an extension of all the work that we've all been doing around impact. And we're trying to capture, let's say, that information, which is so valuable that all those startups, all those founders have been working on all those years. So what it is for me and what it is for us that we want to say, transmit also to our startups is, okay, think about impact as an asset, right? And how can you capture that asset? And then you go back to, okay, try to capture the data on that asset. And then at least we can start, visualizing it and be much more clear, let's say, also in the storytelling that we do to its investors and to its the market.
That's a really great point, Gideon. There's so much untapped potential oftentimes in data, and it's important to think, how do you unlock that and contribute towards that impact story that a lot of these impact first companies are focused on? And I guess adjacent to the data space, but really building off of that, is AI. 2025, the past few years, AI has been kind of that buzzword. And particularly when thinking about early stage companies, there's so many use cases of AI. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen AI adoption in emerging markets in Latin America, and building off of that, how do we encourage startups to use AI in kind of an ethical, environmentally sustainable way, given recent concerns about the use of AI and how it's been developed over the past few years?
Yeah, it's actually funny because if you're long enough in this space, and let's say I've been looking at impact investment for the past 12, 13 years, it's like there's nothing new under the sun in the sense, okay, AI is a new technology. So yeah, that's new in that sense. But when people started to discover, wait a minute, there's an investor that's actually an impact investor, everybody started to add a bullet point to their deck and say, okay, we also do impact. So it wasn't impact first. It was just, okay, if I can just tap into that impact investor niche, I just start adding impact to the deck. And I think what we've learned from that is that no, it starts with the impact, and then you start building the business, and then you start, let's say, doing a reach out. And it's the same with AI. It's like AI can help you tell that story, can help you also be much more efficient as, let's say, as a startup. But you cannot just add the bullet point and say, okay, we're AI powered, which happen a lot now. I'm using OpenAI or tools like that every day, but I cannot say I'm, let's say, AI first, right? As a person.
And Gideon, just really quickly building off of that, I'm curious, what do you see as some of the barriers for adoption of AI by startups in Latin America?
Yeah, I think this is such a huge untapped potential. When I talk to business owners, when I talk to corporates, also, let's say, also multilaterals and NGOs, everybody is aware of it. Nobody's actually tapping into it. So because that's such a huge potential. And it's almost like we're afraid of it, because if we really tap into it, it could be very consequential for how our business is set up, how our teams are built. Maybe we have to let go people. And so there's a lot of, I think, fears around it. But yeah, it's time we start embracing it also in Latin America.
I love what you're saying about we see this trend of people adding that bullet point of, oh, and we use AI too, but what does that actually mean? And how can we help entrepreneurs and startups do that strategically and mindfully, and not just for the sake of saying that you're using AI?
Yeah. No, Laura, and this is, again, I mean, it's just a feature of our time. Probably we need around 12 or 18 months where people really start digging into it. But for us, and that's a responsibility that we feel as, let's say, an ecosystem builder around climate-driven startups is, okay, how can you really incorporate that in your business from basically day one?
Yeah, this is so critical timing-wise right now. And I'll be very curious to see what happens. Do you have ideas of what you think next year the conversation is that we'll be having around this related to the startup space?
I think, and I already see it with some of our startups, the feedback that we get from them in the conversations they have with the client. And I recall one from Mexico, and he was doing a tour in, I think, Argentina. And the clients were saying, he's offering quite an interesting solution, let's say, for big supermarket chains. And so the owner of the supermarket chain basically says, when he enters the door, okay, you better have something AI driven, because otherwise I'm not interested. So that's what they're being told by their future clients. And the same thing with investors, because investors know, of course, that if the organization really is built on top of AI, it's going to be a lot cheaper than investment. So the ROI is going to be big. And this is across the board. It's not because of its climate impact or social impact. All investors are going to look at this.
Just to underscore what you're saying, Gideon, I was just recently in a conversation with somebody, also a founder, who's building more of a hardware company. And he said it's been really difficult these days to raise for a hardware type startup, because everyone's really, from the investor side, looking for that software scalability AI piece that you're talking about. So I do think we are at an inflection point on the impact investing side. And it is incumbent also on investors, particularly impact investors, to think about not getting that gravitational pull to AI just because of the buzzword of AI, but really understand and interrogate what is the AI doing in the functionality of the company and what value it has for the impact piece.
No, 100%. And I think there's a huge potential, because I think this is also something I think you're referring to, Laura, in your question. Okay, what's the outlook for 12, 18 months? I think beyond 18 is going to be difficult. But we see a huge untapped potential in all those climate data that's out there. And there's so much climate data out there. And I see very few startups that actually use it for their thesis or for their business model. Because that's back to your point, Isabelle, and we cannot just ignore all those hardware solutions that we actually need, right? We cannot say, okay, if we want to get to the moon, we need to build rockets, right? And it's not an app on the phone, so we need to build that. So how do we do that? And then it goes back to, okay, but can you actually justify the fact that you need that hardware? And then you have to go back to, let's say, all that data that's available. And I think that's a core element which we, in the design of our new, let's say, programs for next year, we really want to build that into those programs.
And Gideon, just on that point, when thinking about programming and engaging with startups around AI use and integrating that into their business models, if applicable, how are you also going about that, like, ethical use, sustainable use, where it's not overusing it just because it's there, but also thinking about the environmental consequences sometimes of using AI or doing it in a way that's socially responsible?
Yeah, I hear people throw around a lot, AI for good, human-centered AI. Then my question is, okay, what's that actually? I haven't heard any clear definitions on that. So that's also a tricky part. But for sure, and this is back to the point, okay, for us to get access to AI, we have to do this enormous build out of data centers, etc., which of course is a huge consumption, water, energy, how we're going to do this. And I think, so on the one hand, yes, we need to fix that problem. So there's going to be a lot of compensation because there's not going to be any net positive, let's say, data centers for probably a decade or two. So there's probably going to be a lot of compensation in that aspect. But there's also, and this is the other, let's say, side of the same coin, is that for countries like in Latin America, we're now very much dependent on all those data centers that are right now based in the US. Even Europe is now facing this problem. So how can you claim data sovereignty as a country in Latin America? That's by building out your own data centers, right? And then you can actually claim that this piece, at least you have a bit of control over it. So I think data sovereignty is going to be a huge thing for the next decade or so in Latin America. And then the question is, which country is going to be first on going after this? I see a huge potential for Colombia because of this. We have enough water, but that's not the case for a lot of other countries. So data sovereignty is going to be a huge issue. And that's beyond even the, let's say, the environmental footprint.
Just thinking about the timeliness aspect of this and the time that we're in right now, another piece of that is these negotiations that are happening right now for COP30 in Brazil. And I would love to hear, if you were at that negotiation table at COP, do you have a maybe 1 minute message that you would like to put out there to look at what it would really take to unlock the full potential of climate entrepreneurship in Latin America?
I was at UNGA 80 last month in New York. And if you have conversations over there, how we're going to fix this, then at a macro level, a lot of things make sense, right? And all these programs fit very neatly into each other. But then you're back in Bogota and then it's, okay, wait a minute. The harsh reality is different, right? And I think that's still the biggest gap. So there's this significant knowledge gap. And it took, I would say, 20 years, let's say, everybody to get over that knowledge hump, which is called the internet. And now the gap is widening again. Now it's AI and data. So how are we going to close that gap? Because that's the only way that we in Latin America, I think, can do it, but it has to happen on the ground. It's a pretty known, let's say, slogan about, okay, global climate change, but finding the local climate solutions. And that is very true. So we have to do that locally. That's the only way. This requires a lot of collaboration. Again, one of those buzzwords, but unfortunately it's true. The only way we can solve this is locally. So we don't need thousands of entrepreneurs, we need hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs to do this, right? And how can we unlock this? And I think that's the most important thing. And then maybe 30 seconds more on the funding. This is also a weird conundrum in the sense that we see more impact funding coming into Latin America, which is awesome. But then if you look at the ticket size, it will never get where it needs to get. So also there we have, that gap is actually widening, because as the tickets get bigger, let's say the new startups are not able to tap into them. There is a gap in the sense that how can we fix that early stage portion where maybe we need to work more with angels. We need to have a different model for catalytic funding. And I think that's also very important to realize. Even if the funding gets bigger, doesn't mean it gets where it has to support the ecosystem.
No, it's a really important point, Gideon, and particularly when thinking about how do you help build these emerging entrepreneurial ecosystems, that funding piece is always really critical. And would be curious to hear a little bit of your take on what's the state of play with dilutive and non-dilutive financing, because oftentimes, particularly with the early stage companies you're looking at, grants are critical for getting to that point where you can then raise that early ticket size. So curious to hear your thoughts on what does that split look like? How much is there a gap on the grant side versus the kind of pre-seed side? And what are some of the roles that you're seeing governments play versus impact investors versus different family offices, funder groups in trying to bridge some of the gaps on both of those capital types?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, and there's a bunch of reasons why it hasn't happened, right? That's always easy to point out. But solutions we're working on with our current partners is, okay, how can we crowd in private sector funding much earlier? And how can we do it next to, let's say, non-dilutive funding, let's say grant funding coming in from multilaterals, for example. But how can you team that up? And that's the critical part. And there's mandates and there's a lot of guidelines which restrict that. But the only way to do this is having them work together, because it also allows them to understand what's happening, let's say, on both sides in that sense. Because if we don't crowd in, let's say, private sector funding much earlier, there's a lack of understanding what happened before that. And I think that is something that we need to try to fix. It also helps us to extend, let's say, those non-dilutive dollars in a sense. And I think that is very important. Again, it sounds very easy. And now we have to figure out what's the solution to do this, but it has to happen.
Absolutely. Have you seen any example partnerships or models that have been really successful in trying to do that and bridging both pieces and being catalytic and bringing in different actors?
So we've seen a couple of initiatives. One of the initiatives we're part of it's called P4G. This is a platform ran by a World Resources Institute. It went through a couple of iterations as well. It has 3 donor countries. It's Denmark, it's the Netherlands, and it's Korea. They're spread across the global south. They currently have 8 focus countries in their portfolio, and they work on especially water solutions, energy solutions, etc. It's an interesting model. It's not without its own challenges as well, of course. But I think it shows that you can get ODA funding to early stage startups, which always has been said, how are you going to do that? How do you get ODA funding into private sector? And then, of course, is how can you crowd in private sector funding early on in those projects? So I think there's initiatives there that are doing this. But yes, we have to learn from each other how to become much more efficient.
Absolutely. And just one last question building off of this, Gideon, is from the climate tech side, which is the area that you're really focused on, is the climate sustainability ventures. Do you see any particular unique challenges that climate ventures, biodiversity, nature-focused startups are facing in trying to raise this capital that might be different than a fintech company in Latin America, and or maybe a unique value proposition that make them more appealing to certain investors?
So I always go back to this with all our founders, and I teach at some of the local universities. I do some guest lectures and stuff like that. I always pop the questions like, okay, why would you buy an electric car as a consumer? Why would you buy that electric car? And then, of course, everybody says, yeah, it's because the climate, because they look at me and they feel they have the need to tell me that it's climate. They say, oh, what is the actual reason? And then the actual reason is because you pay less taxes, you don't pay for gas. I can fully charge my car at my employer's office. So all of those types of benefits pop up. So actually, and this has been researched, I think climate is on number 5 or something on the total list. So it's not necessarily that climate drives your business. I mean, your sales, But as long as you keep growing your business, you keep growing your impact. So what we're trying to tell our founders is that if you at the beginning of your business identify your scalable unit of impact, right? Which is almost like a set it and forget it thing. So you sell like the cars, okay, it's built in, right? You can run the numbers on that. It's publicly available. And for every car you sell, you know that you're also increasing your impact. So that scalable unit of impact, it has to be in that business as from the start. And then you don't have to think about it every time you sell a car. But at the end of the year, when you do the numbers, impact will be there. So I think that's a crucial element where what people sometimes confuse is, I have to do the impact measurement report. Oh my God, did I make the numbers? No, it should already be baked into your model.
Yes, absolutely. That is such an important point, that sustainable business is smart business. It just should be integrated into all the work you do, regardless of the sector that you're working on.
Totally, Laura.
We are at that time to start wrapping up the show. One thing that we like to do to wrap up each show is to ask our guest if you could narrow it down to one sentence or a phrase of something that gets you excited about the future. Gideon, to you, if you had to describe the future of climate entrepreneurship in Latin America, really looking at the next 5 to 10 years, how would you describe it?
I was listening to a remarkable investor out of Silicon Valley yesterday on a podcast. And he says, I'm a naturalist. I love nature. Every time I get a chance, I'll do it. I'm there. I'm doing my hikes. But he says, the whole climate change thing, from his perspective, he says, that's a fixed problem. Okay, I think that's an exaggerated statement, right? That might be from a technology perspective where you say, we have solar, so it's fixed. That doesn't mean it already trickled down to the rest of the world, right? But I truly believe that right now we talk about climate entrepreneurship. I think in 10 years, we're not talking about climate, we'll just talk about entrepreneurship because it's going to be baked into it. And that's back to what you just said, Laura. It's a smart way of doing business. And yeah, allow us to talk about climate entrepreneurship for another decade. But by then, no longer it's going to be necessary. So that would be my let's say, optimistic, message going forward the next decade.
That's great, Gideon. Thank you. And I guess to close, you're doing incredible work with CleantechHUB across Latin America with partners globally. And so if someone's listening to this and they're excited to connect with you, Gideon, what are ways that people can reach out to you, connect, find out more about CleantechHUB, the work you're doing, and help push this change forward together?
Check out our website, CleantechHUB.net. You find all the information. Of course, we're also on other social media platforms where you can find us. And keep following us. If you have great contributions and things and ideas, we're happy to share. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter. Happy to collaborate.
Thank you so much, Gideon. Really a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Gideon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode, and a big thank you to Gideon for joining us today for this conversation on climate entrepreneurship in Latin America. Please rate and review our podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on upcoming episodes.
If you would like to get in touch and/or would like to access more information about today's guest, please see the show notes. Thank you again, and we're excited to have you back soon.